Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true. I'll go first.
And I'll go second. So these are admittedly not my stories, they're my dad's stories. Just a little background on my father. He doesn't believe in ghosts at all. Not even a little. He thinks that that is made up. It's fake. And now that I've gotten that out of the way, he has experienced the scariest hauntings I've ever heard about in my life. When he was younger, I would say probably about like 9 to 13, in that age range, he had a friend that started getting into like kind of occult weird things. He started feeling a little bit uncomfortable around this friend, and he remembers two really specific incidents with this friend that made him stop hanging out with this kid. Um, one of which was they were at a river with a bunch of other boys, and they were swimming, playing as kids do. And this friend in question was in the water next to my father. And while they're playing, my dad looks up, and standing across the river at the tree line, and this is in rural Canada, like in the middle of nowhere Canada, standing at the tree line is that friend. And he's just staring at my dad, and he just goes like this. Mind you, that kid is next to my dad at that time, so he's seeing two of them. And the other one just turns around and goes into the woods after beckoning my dad after him. I hate that story. It makes my eyes tear up. I hate that story. But my dad, being a child, still hung out with this kid. So he goes over to his house, and this kid is sitting in this big, like, lazy boy recliner chair. And he's sitting there, and he's kind of just staring at my dad while they're talking, acting super strange. And he looks at my dad and he goes, "I've been in your dreams." And as soon as he says that, my dad hears like pounding on the underside of this kid's chair. He's sitting cross-legged in his chair, not moving, and he hears something beating on the underside of the chair. And this kid goes, "I've been in your dreams." And my dad, stone-faced, dead-ass, looks at me and goes, "And the fucked up thing? He had been in my dreams." My father doesn't believe in ghosts. I asked him to explain these to me in like a scientific way. He goes, "I was just hallucinating." I was just having a vivid hallucination. Anyway, those are just two of my favorite little stories from my father, who swears the ghosts are not real. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of what's going on with my dad. First things first, yes, I am going to tell more stories. That was the number one asked question. Are there more? Yes, there are. There are more of him, there are more of the two of us, and there's more of just me on my own, if you're interested in that. Um, but yes, there are more stories. I'm going to do FAQs in this video, and then I will post more stories in a different video, but at the same time. So there's no like, come back tomorrow. But this is the FAQ video. The other video is on my page. Find it. You're good at this. I believe in you. Okay, another really common question. What were the dreams that this kid said he was in? My dad doesn't really remember the specifics of the dreams themselves, but he does remember that he, as a natural born skeptic, tried to trip this kid up. So he was like, "Okay, if you were in my dreams, tell me what the dreams were." And he was able to. The kid was able to tell him accurately what the dreams were. And my dad tried to confuse him by saying, for example, he's walking down the hallway and my dad said, "Okay, and then I went left." And his friend said, "No, you went right." And he was always right. Every time my dad tried to trick him, he always had the correct answer. Another popular one, where's that kid now? Believe it or not, he's an accountant. Completely normal life. I don't know what is up with that. After that age, he just grew out of it, got really into math, which maybe is a bigger sign of him being evil, but who was under the chair? We don't know. That's why it's scary. A lot of people, this isn't a question, said, "That's not a ghost." I know, don't be pedantic, we're all having fun here. Did the kid have a twin? No. This was a small rural town in Canada. They absolutely would have known if this kid had a secret twin. This is not Pretty Little Liars. Is my dad schizophrenic? Crazy question to ask, I'm not gonna lie. But no. Um, no. And a lot of people were like, "Well, yeah, hallucinations happen." I know this. I too have read books. However, he has never had any sort of hallucinations, either auditory or visual, ever in his life, aside from these specific incidents. As the question of did anyone else see it or corroborate it, I don't recall if anyone else specifically saw these things, but there is another thing that happened in his life that both my mom and my stepmom have corroborated. Another person commented, and again, not a question, "Your dad is bi." Okay. thank you for letting me know. You asked, and I'm delivering. These are more of my dad's ghost stories. First things first, if you were wondering how he reacted to the news that his ghost story has gone viral, I texted him saying that all of the comments agree he did see something paranormal and I've won that decades-long argument, and this was his reply. As you can see, extremely in character, no progress was made here. So one of the first ones is a reoccurring dream that he has had his entire life. Since he was a little kid, in the dream he is being chased down a street he recognizes, usually somewhere close to wherever he's living at the time. He's always the exact age he is in real life, so he's aged up as he's had this dream over the years. And he's being chased down the street by a creature made of shadow, and he knows that whatever happens, he can't let this thing catch him. It's only ever caught him once when he was a kid. It got close to him, and he says he remembers in the dream it pushed him up against a wall, and when he woke up, he had bruises. Don't love that. He's had that reoccurring dream once every 4 or 5 years throughout his whole life. There's no warning. He says it's very unsettling. He doesn't like it. The dream does scare him, but he just thinks it's a dream. However, there is a joint paranormal experience we shared that does relate to that dream, but that's a longer story, so I think I'll make that its own separate thing, because that's going to take a while to explain, because we were both basically having paranormal experiences that were connected, but we didn't realize it until we talked about it weeks later. One time he was with a friend. It might have actually been the same friend in the previous story, because this sounds like something this friend would do. He said that they should have a seance, and so they set up everything for a seance. They turned off all the lights, they lit a bunch of candles, and my dad started to get kind of nervous. He started to have this gut feeling that something wasn't right, and so he was like, I don't want to do this anymore, and he decided to start going around and turning on the lights. And as he's walking up the stairs to go turn on the lights, one of the pictures comes off the wall, and the way he describes it is it was about head level, and it came about 2 feet off of the wall and hit him in the side of the head. And he said we put the picture back up, and he said they spent an hour going through the house trying to make that picture fall down again, banging on the walls, slamming doors, stomping on the floor. They could not get that thing to fall down. And granted, and he, as much as a skeptic as he is, still admits to this day that it came way too far off the wall to just be, it fell off the hook. And another one I mentioned in the FAQ video, and this one has been corroborated by my stepmom and my mom. My mom is way more like me, more like, yeah, the paranormal is probably real. My stepmom, very much like my dad. Ghosts aren't real. They're both engineers, by the way, if you couldn't tell by the everything about their personalities. She does not buy into that, but she has admitted that this is real. Both my mom and my stepmom have said that this does happen, and my dad is... this is the only thing that he admits he has no explanation for. He won't say it's paranormal, but it's the one thing he can't come up with a reason for. His bed shakes every once in a while. It's happened his whole life. Every once in a while, he'll be laying in bed and the bed will shake. And the way that all 3 of them have described it is it feels like someone is standing at the end of the bed and just grabbing the mattress and doing this with it. And it's very subtle, but you can definitely feel it. And when I talked to my mom about it, she said it was very eerie because she was awake and she felt it, and she thought my dad was sleeping or, something like he was twitching in his sleep. And she asked him if he was awake. And he says, yes, I'm awake. And she says, do you feel that? And he goes, you can feel it too? It only happened twice in their marriage, and it's only happened to my stepmom once or twice, so it's very rare. And he has no idea. His explanation on that one is, don't know, could be anything, but if that's the worst this evil spirit can do, no big deal. Alright, if you made it that far, thank you. I'm delighted. My dad couldn't care less. Love him to pieces, but this is all fake. So, anyway, if you want to hear more, especially about the one that we shared together, that has to be its own whole video, but let me know. Okay, bye! This one I can speak on with a lot more authority because this primarily happened to me. We're done talking about my dad. He's old news. It does involve his recurring dream that he had his whole life, which I talked about in Ghost Stories Part 2, and I will link in the caption. Okay, so this one requires a little backstory on me. When I was a kid, I lived in a house that I now think is deeply haunted. I was, at the time, I think 5 or 6 years old though, and I was a little too young to even really know what ghosts were. I wasn't really aware of that. I just thought everyone had super vivid nightmares every night and was really terrified of the dark. And I thought that everyone just had the lights go out whenever they were alone in a room. including like the light switches moving. You know, I thought that was normal. I didn't realize it was paranormal until years later when I asked my parents about it, and I said, hey, do you remember our house that we lived in when I was in kindergarten? And my mom, without missing a beat, said that house was evil. That's why we left. Okay. That's great to know years later. But I think that there were two entities in that house. I think there was one that was trying to harm me, and I think there was one that was protecting me. Well, there were more than two, but those were the two primary ones. And I think the one that was trying to protect me is what I referred to for years after as the Shadow Man. I got the impression that it was an adult man, but he didn't ever make me feel nervous. I felt very safe. I would see him. I slept in my mom's room almost every night because I was terrified of that house. I would see almost every night he would walk from one end of the room, cross the edge of the end of the bed, out through the other wall. Every night, around the same time, I would wake up and he'd be there, and the only way I could describe him was that he was darker than the darkness. But he didn't scare me. Everything else terrified me in that house, but he didn't. I was always very comfortable. I remember waking up from a nightmare one night, and I could have sworn I saw him sitting on the end of my bed. Again, wasn't afraid of him. Which brings me back to my dad's recurring dream and our joint paranormal experience. So I was staying at his house for the weekend, and I went to say goodnight to him, and as soon as I walked out of his room, literally the moment I crossed the threshold out of his room and into the hallway, I felt just this pulse of like primal panic and fear, and I remember thinking to myself, there's something waiting on the stairs, and I was just so afraid. I was probably 12 or 13 at the time, and I went back to my room, and I was too afraid to even turn out the lights. I slept with the lights on all night. I barely slept. I remember laying on my back with the blankets pulled all the way up to my chin, just staring at the ceiling, motionless. I was too afraid to go to the bathroom. I was too afraid to turn off the light. I was just paralyzed with fear, and I didn't really know why. It had come so suddenly. The next night, night number 2, the same thing. The moment I leave his room, I feel this pulse of fear. I'm immediately just paralyzed with it. I'm up most of the night, lights on, too afraid to sleep. The third night, night number 3, in the middle of the night, I had finally gotten really sick of it, and because I remember the Shadow Man being protective of me as a kid, I remember thinking to myself, if you were ever real, I need you now. And instantly, I felt better. It was like I had never been worried. I was never afraid. I was completely fine. I reached over and turned out the lights and went to bed and slept normally. Weeks later, I was telling my dad about this experience, and, he was kind of like, I don't know, that sounds kind of fake. But now that you mention it, he goes on to tell me that those same 3 nights, he had been having that reoccurring dream where he was being chased by a creature made of shadow coming from the darkness. And this is the only time really in his life that he's had this dream back to back like this. And he says he was having it every night, and it was getting progressively closer. And then on the 3rd night, he woke up in the middle of the dream because he heard something in his room say, hello? And that's exactly the same time that I suddenly felt completely fine. I like to think of myself as a fairly scientific-minded individual, and I know a lot of this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I've told these stories so many times over the years because I do remember them so vividly, and they impacted me greatly as a child. I don't know if it's paranormal. I don't know if it's just a weird coincidence. I don't know if it's a kid's imagination. I am not the authority on that one, but it is a very fun and spooky story that my dad to this day denies. He wasn't there for that mentally, I don't think. But it did happen, and it's bananas.